The next sheet, February 14th and February 16th, 1981. On February 14th, Valentine's Day, he went to the Commonwealth Convention Center in Louisville, Kentucky, to see an ICW show, the Paphos promotion. The main event, two main events, Bob Roop versus Randy Savage, and Pez Whatley and Ronnie Garvin against Bob Orton Jr. and Jeff Sword in a Texas death match. So then that was on February 14th.
Look at the attendance.
And I'm about to get there. The attendance for the card was 250 in Louisville, Kentucky. This is what we've been talking about when people fondly remember ICW now because Randy Savage was there, and in the early days it was Bob Orton Jr. And Rip Rogers had a great time there and learned a lot. They never drew a fucking house, not against Jarrett. They could draw when they had a town that only they were running. Some of the eastern Kentucky towns, they'd put 700-800 people in those spot shows because nobody else was running it. But when they tried to run head-to-head with Jerry Jarrett, it was a fucking nightmare. The Louisville Gardens was in those days never below, if there were less than 2,500 people in the building for the weekly show, it was because of bad weather, snow, thunderstorms, whatever. And that was still not a real good house. And a lot of times it was more like 3,000, 4,000. The ICW shows, they did 250, 300, 350, because that was the people who were going to go see every bit of wrestling. But since Jarrett was in town every week, how much money you got, how much time you got, how many tickets you're going to buy. They couldn't get a break. But here's the thing. On February 14th, he saw the ICW event live. On February 16th, me and Norman both watched the Madison Square Garden show on MSG Cable at his house. And let's compare some things. Because this is the same guy looking at wrestling, it's just two different kinds of wrestling. In February 14th in Louisville, the Bob Roop versus Randy Savage match got 3.5 stars from Weasel. And the Texas Death Tag match got 4 stars because they did all kinds of bullshit and crazy stuff and boom, boom, boom. And he was into it. And Savage was involved, did a run-in.
Mentions that Savage's music at the time was hot stuff.
Yeah, that's what he played, hot stuff. I want some hot stuff, babe. Donna Summer. This was before Eddie Gilbert became hot stuff. This was that was Savage's ICW music. But anyway, 2 nights later, Moondogs and Lou Albano versus Tony Gurria, Pat Patterson, and Rick Martel, 2 stars. Killer Khan versus Dom DiNucci, 1 star. Stan Hansen versus Bob Backlund. Listen to this. Backlund has got to be the biggest joke in all of wrestling. Backlund and Hansen were both bloody during the match, although I hesitate to call what Howdy Doody, that was Bob Backlund's nickname with the smart fans, Howdy Doody had on his face as blood. It was shown on TV where Backlund stuck his head under the ring for 3 days. Coincidentally, when he got back up, he had blood all over his face. Just when the match was starting to get exciting, the referee stopped the match because of excessive bleeding. If they did that at Jarrett's Cards in Louisville, the fans would lynch the referee. Jim Cornette said he's bled more from a popped pimple. By the end of the match, Howdy had all the blood wiped off of his face. I really feel sorry for the WWF fans. I can barely stand to watch Backlund once a month. They have to watch him all the time. Hansen gets 4 stars. Howdy only 1. And then Hulk Hogan versus Rick Mcgraw was a 2-star match. Pedro Morales versus Sergeant Slaughter got 3 stars because of Slaughter. It says Slaughter looked really good during the match, which is quite a compliment considering he had no opponent. The only nice thing I can say about Morales is he falls out of the ring good. So the point is, here you got 250 people in the Commonwealth Convention Center in Louisville, Kentucky watching an outlaw show, but the matches were better than what you saw at Madison Square Garden with 20,000 people there, because it was the difference in territories and what the people were educated to. If you had showed, if the live card for Madison Square Garden had just suddenly walked out in Louisville in those days and had the exact same matches they had in MSG, it would have killed the fucking town in Louisville. People would have never come back because they were rotten. And it wasn't what the people were used to. It wasn't the style or the flavor. So I think it's interesting when you see a guy, again, who didn't have any professional involvement with wrestling, was just a fan, the different way that he rated the different territory matches. And then there's one coming up I know you want to talk about.
Well, Jim, a couple other notes from these reviews here of these two shows that you pointed out, because it kind of goes into what we were talking about earlier, the style of writing and the snark, as you put it. From the ICW show Match 3, Limping Lanny Poffo beat Hustler Rip Rogers with a sunset flip in 1601. I hate to admit it, but Lanny does have some good wrestling moves. 3 stars. And then if you go to the MSG show, oh boy, thankfully the time isn't here. SD Jones versus Baron Cicluna.
Ooh.
Both men looked terrible. During the match, it looked like they were giving each other a massage. 1.5 star, but we don't get who won or what the time was.
Yeah.
You know what? This popped me just because it's a name that I hear Lance Russell saying, and it makes me laugh for no good reason. The Hangman versus Frank Savage. This bout was a little better than the first match, but not by much. The guillotine that the Hangman used at the end of the match looked good. The Hangman was much better when he wrestler as John Louis a few years ago.
Yeah,
now he looks awful. Obviously he meant that, but I hear Lance Russell in my head. John Louis!
John Louis! Because he worked as Hangman Neil Guay, and he was also, as you just mentioned, the Hangman in the WWF, but for some reason, when they brought, and he was French of some description, either French Canadian or French or whatever, but when they brought him down here and teamed him up with Joe LeDuc, they gave him his name. I think it was supposed to be Jean-Louis. That sounds French, right? But the way that they would print it in the newspaper ads was John, John, Louis, Louie. So all these fucking Southerners, that's old John Louis. Sounded as French as I do.
Well, Jim, before we wrap things up, and there are so many of these, and we're going to go through them.
We're going to do multiple parts on this because there's a lot of stuff in here as you go through in chronological order that has been lost to history.